Good morning, welcome. I'm Lenny Rogers from Adam Matthew. Thank you very much for joining us. This morning's session is entitled Pathway to Primary Sources, so hopefully you're in the right place. If you're not, we'd encourage you to stay anyways. The objective here is really both to introduce what we at Adam Matthew do, which is to digitize primary source content and make available a wide plethora of material for various research agendas across humanities and social sciences, and to show you some of the visualization tools that we use to explore those sources, and then really look at a life application of how the content is currently being used and in practice as a case study at the University of Denver. So I'm going to introduce to you this morning my colleague Alex Butler, who works as a product specialist on our team and also focuses on outreach and support. And then we will also ask Michael Levine Clark, the interim dean for the University of Denver Libraries, to walk us through Adam Matthew at his library. So we will save some time at the end for questions, and certainly encourage you to reserve those questions for the end, and we'll look to have a conversation about how you're currently using Adam Matthew at your libraries or other primary sources, and certainly the discovery and application of those tools. Okay, thanks very much, and I'll turn it over to Alex Butler.
Hi, thanks. Okay, so as Lenny said, I'm going to talk about how some of the interactive tools that we use in our resources to try and put primary sources in more than just a search, browse, repeat function, but in a more visual, interactive context. So I'm going to cover three key areas, really. I'm going to cover a bit of context for why we study primary sources, particularly in the classroom. I'm going to talk about some of those interactive tools, the visual pathways that we can embed in our resources to try and make primary source research accessible to, well, the classroom, but all levels of student as well. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about some of the sort of baked-in functionality that we have in our resources to try and really streamline that research process. So firstly, why do we use primary sources for teaching? So the first is to really engage students, give them a deeper understanding of history as really an interconnected set of events in human history. The second is to really encourage critical thinking, get students to ask questions, make inferences about sources, see those connections, and actually start to question sources and see those sensitive bias and see that historiography. And the third thing was to really start to construct a deep knowledge, to construct their own knowledge. And that's comparing, contrasting sources, looking at the contradictions and I guess really the complexity of studying history and writing sound historical argument. So I'm going to show three key examples, three tools that we've built for our primary source collections that I think give, a good understanding of the sort of visual pathways that we're trying to create. And the first is in mass observation online. And just a show of hands, has anyone seen this resource before? Has anyone used it? Adam Matthew team putting their hands up, that's good, that's reassuring. Anyone else? Okay, so just for a bit of context, mass observation was a social research organisation for the 20th century, and their aim really was to record the everyday lives of British people through the 30s to the 60s, through diaries, questionnaires. So we have a lot of diary content in this resource, and what we've tried to do is think about, well, how can we view this material by diarist in more than just a basic search list? So what we did is we took every single diarist, all of their writings, we mapped it out into a map across Great Britain. So here you can see a bit of context about this said diarist. So this is diarist 5450. There's a clerical worker, a quick quote about them. And then from there you can click through and look at all of their individual writings. So by having that map, we can see the origin, can see the context of the source, and then get into the actual material itself. So I'll just leave that there for a second. So as I said, diary material. Now the second example is from our African American communities resource. Again, quick show of hands, anyone? Great, 2. I'm glad you've seen it, Michael. So this is, again, primary source material. It's a mix of organizational papers, personal writings, and also a huge bank of oral histories as well, focusing on the everyday lives, tensions, activism of African American people across the US in the 20th century. So as well as a lot of organizational papers, personal writings, there's also a lot of video testimonies in here. And we're really seeing video testimony becoming a primary source that undergraduates are using as well. You know, it's a valid source. So what we try to do is make sure that all of the material is A, fully transcripted and has full metadata, and is actually fully searchable with those organizational papers, those personal writings, those text sources as well. So I can run a search about, I don't know, let's say the jazz scene in Atlanta in the 1960s. I can find a magazine telling me about that, but then I can hear from Lonnie King in the same search results list as well. Get those multiple sources, multiple media. And my third example is from the Colonial America resource. Again, quick show of hands. Great, a bit more, yeah, it's a bit more well-known, this resource. So for those of you who don't know, this is all the British government material from the CO5 classification at the National Archives in the UK. So it's all British government material covering the North American and Caribbean colonies from 1606 right through to British withdrawal in 1822. So this really is a vast resource. So we were thinking, well, how can we make this accessible for, you know, not just our, you know, your PhD researchers, but your undergraduates as well, who are looking at colonial America. We know it's taught. So what we've done is we've put a lot of work into the indexing here, and we've mapped out all the metadata terms, all the keywords, places, and people into this data association tool, so we can see those connections. You know, if I'm writing a paper on establishing Carolina as a colony, I can look at Carolina as a place and look at those key individuals, those key words, those key events, all in a nice visualization. So they're my three sort of key examples, just something to think about. And we do have many others, so I encourage you to go and look at some other resources. And lastly, I just want to quickly talk about some of the baked-in functionality. So we have a personal repository called My Archive, which is great not only for individual researchers, but it's great for teachers, whether you're putting together a list of documents to show your class, a curated set of sources before a class, maybe. This is also just a slide to show our Migration to New Worlds resource, published last year. All printed material in Anna Matthew resources is full text searchable. So really good for those lower level undergraduate researchers who may need a bit more help to get to those sources. And lastly, just a few more. And that's it from me, really, from the Adam Matthew perspective, really. We looked at those three key examples, some of those research aids baked into all of our primary source platforms. So that's it from me. I think Michael's going to talk a bit about these sort of visual tools in an actual library context and from a library perspective now. So I'll hand over. Do I need to do anything?
Now, get started, I think.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sure. All right. Actually, maybe he does need to do something. I'm a Mac guy. All right. See? All right. That's what I was trying to do. It's really embarrassing to be a. All right. So, technology problems aside, I'm excited to be part of this presentation because I've had a really long interest in primary sources. I was an undergraduate history major. I have a master's in history as well. My wife is a historian. I care deeply about primary sources, and so we've made a strategy at the University of Denver to really buy comprehensively, and I think part of that is because of my own experiences. As an undergraduate, I went to school in Connecticut, and I was required to do a senior thesis as a history major. And that was primary source-based research at a time before resources like these existed outside of archives. And I was lucky enough to find some primary sources at the New York Public Library and at Columbia, and I could take the train into New York for the day a bunch of times and do my research. But that's because I was lucky enough to be at a school that was close enough to those resources. If I had been at the University of Denver, there's no way I could have done the senior thesis that I did, because I didn't have access to those sorts of resources. So with that in mind, we started really to think about building collections comprehensively for primary sources at the university. Rather than picking and choosing, we buy everything. And that sounds maybe crazy. It's certainly expensive, although it's not as expensive as buying a bunch of one-offs over time. We have, I guess our goal is that students in the humanities or social sciences, or really anywhere where there's a requirement or expectation for primary source research, that a student at the University of Denver should be able to do a project based on what we have available to them. It may not be exactly the right thing, but it's something that can help them on their topic, whether their topic is geographically based or subject based or time period based. We hope that we have something for them. So we've put a lot of money into this, and part of that is because we put a lot of money into the sciences. It seems fair to put a lot of money into the humanities. But it's also for this idea that an undergraduate especially who's majoring in a subject area where primary source research is necessary should be able to do that without traveling somewhere. The History Senior Seminar was also part of our thinking as we started on this approach to buying everything. As a reference librarian, I haven't been a reference librarian in a long time, but when I was a reference librarian about 12 or 13 years ago, I used to work with the History Senior Seminar class, and these were the majors who are writing a year-long research project paper that is part of, it's basically their senior thesis, although we don't call it that. And as a reference librarian 10 or 12 or 13 years ago, I really had to struggle to find resources for some of these students. And as more and more of these digital primary source collections became available, we realized that we could serve those needs by having something available for them. So because of that, we really don't buy just this one primary source collection. We don't go through and know what our faculty research interests are or what the specific courses are and buy accordingly. We buy much more broadly. And the first time we did that was actually not with Adam Matthew, it was with Gail. And he gave, our rep at the time gave me a list of resources. It turned out that we actually wanted quite a few of them for the normal reasons that you want them. We had faculty who did research in these areas, we had known courses. But I said, what if we got everything? What could you do? And it actually worked out really well. We got a great discount and were able to buy everything that we wanted for just a tiny bit more than we would have bought the 5 or 6 collections that we were really seriously looking at. So it works out well. The other reason that we've been able to make this happen is that we're not committing to a subscription in the most cases with these. We're buying something up front. So in terms of the budget, it's actually not that hard to manage. So we have these great collections. We then had to sort of set out to get them used, right? We bought them, we told faculty were excited, but there wasn't always usage of them in the classroom. So we started to develop some intentionality around primary source content. And one thing that we've done is this is a LibGuide for the History Senior Seminar, the course that I already mentioned, which is the required course for all history majors where they write a year-long project. Primary source content is really important in this area, so we have a whole section of this LibGuide that is devoted to how do you use primary sources. And this is primary sources whether they're in these digital collections, whether it's a printed diary in the circulating collection, whether it's resources in special collections. But a couple of years ago, we started to get even more intentional about trying to bring primary sources out into the courses. And we have been pairing an archivist and a reference librarian, and they go and they meet with faculty members. They talk over, what would it take to really embed primary source content within your class? How can we help you construct assignments, and how can we help you with coming into your class and talking about using primary sources? The goal for us is not just digital or print, it's both types of sources, so it's the archivist and the reference librarian coming in together to work with them. The feedback we've gotten is been tremendously positive from faculty that have done this and from the students. And the student perspective, they've talked about how it makes history more real for them. They've talked about how they feel that they're better scholars because of it. And the faculty have been equally impressed. So one particular class that we did this with last fall, this was a course called a course on World War I that was taught in the fall quarter of 2015. History professor Carol Halstosky, she's a European historian, but this is a World War I class that is broadly conceived, American experience, everybody's experience. So Carol was teaching this class and decided that she would completely revise the course with the help of the librarian and the archivist to try to make sure that there was much more focus on primary sources than in the past. This is a lower level course. She wanted her students to develop archival literacy skills, so understand how to use a finding aid, understand what it means to use somebody's personal papers, for instance. And then the students could pick any topic related to World War I and do this quarter-long research project using primary sources. We had 2 sessions where Peggy Kieran, the Arts and Humanities Reference Librarian, came into the class and taught the students how to use, how to search for primary source databases, but also how to search the open web for primary source material. So it's not just about 1 or 2 resources, it's about primary source content generally. The class had 2 visits to special collections where they worked with the archivist and really got into the nitty-gritty of working with physical collections. Students then were required to bring at least 2 sources to every class and be prepared to talk about those sources. They had to write papers where they analyzed those sources. And then there was a final research paper that incorporated the various resources that they had been working with all quarter. And because they'd been thinking about these sources all the way through, it generated probably better topics than could have been done otherwise, and more polished papers than might have otherwise happened as well. As you can see here, the topics were really all over the place. They were able to choose a wide range of things based on the primary source content that was available to them. So some of them did it on sort of social issues around World War I. There were cultural issues around World War I, and then there were some who did things on strategy and tactics within the military during World War I. Peggy Kieran, who's the librarian who worked with this group, put together this LibGuide, and it's pretty small, but maybe you can see up here that the main sort of the first thing you see in this guide is the First World War portal from Adam Matthew. This was the source that they used the most. It was kind of their starting point, but it was absolutely not the only primary source content that they were pointed to. And so we have a long list, just for instance, of newspapers and magazines from the period that students could use. Here's the First World War portal. It has the searching functionality. It has a lot of extras, and Carol told me that she used some of those extras a lot. So yes, the students were using the primary sources. Yes, that was the point. But she used the maps within this portal quite often in teaching, and she used the chronologies very often. So working with students to sort of understand where their documents fit in within this broader context was really important to her. And the usage has been tremendous. So the First World War content that we acquired from Adam Matthew, we started acquiring in 2011. It was released over time. We acquired it between 2011 and 2014. In the fall of 2013, so comparing fall to fall to fall, in the fall of 2013, there were no page views in any of this content. That doesn't mean it wasn't used all year, but it wasn't used during the fall quarter when this course is taught. In the fall of 2014, there were only 4,100 page views. And then in the fall of 2015, when we had this class where students were really expected to use this content, we had 25,000 page views. It's really impressive. So it's a 60, and across all of the Adam Matthew databases, there's a 64% increase in usage from fall 2014 to fall 2015. And this is the time period when we were making a much more concerted effort to get out into classes. So some feedback from Carol about her use of sources and about this class and about the success of this project. She said that students gained a deeper understanding of history and of the war, right? The fact that they were able to read the primary sources made it, gave them just a better understanding of what was going on. Many of them commented about how it made it more real. They used a lot of different resources. They said to Carol that they felt more invested in the class. They felt more invested in learning about this time period. And I love the fact, this idea of one student who said she was taking charge of her education by doing this, right? So the fact that she was using the primary sources made her feel like she was more in control. Carol went on to say that she found that many students were better scholars because of this. She said that students told her, not just one student, but many of these students told her that they had never really questioned their secondary literature. But this forced them to question it, because many times they were reading the secondary research, but had already looked at the primary sources and were saying, oh, I actually interpret that a little bit differently. So it gave them a better understanding of how history is done. A better understanding that you are, as a historian, trying to tell a story based on these sources. You're not trying to tell what the facts were, because the facts are often open for interpretation. So this led to really great conversations within the class. Students were able to talk about how maybe two sources that they were looking at were potentially contradictory, or how their sources contradicted the secondary literature, or how what they were reading could be informed more deeply by these sources. So she found it to be really very, very successful in a lot of different ways, in terms of critical thinking, in terms of engagement, in terms of giving students just a better feeling about their education. So Carol sent me this long email where she was really raving about this class, and that was in preparation for this presentation. I then sent that letter to the provost, who is the person who gives us the money to buy these sorts of things. And I said, look at this amazing example of students being engaged because of something that the library has done, right? We bought these resources. We figured out a way to get a librarian and an archivist to go in and work in this class. And students love this, and it's been a great experience for them. I don't know whether it's on this slide or not, but a couple of the students said that this was the best experience that they had had in a class at the University of Denver. So the provost was really happy about that. Maybe he'll be happy enough to give me even more money to buy these sorts of resources, but at the very least, I have it on his radar that we have these collections. And so it's been a really successful project, and is kind of what we had hoped for when we started to acquire all these resources. And as I already said that we started this with Gale. We've been doing it with Adam Matthew for years. We've been doing it with Redex for years. We've been doing it with ProQuest for years. We've been buying comprehensively and getting a substantial enough discount that it makes sense for us. So, any questions, or did you want to come up and say anything before we open it for questions?
Before we turn it up to questions, I won't turn on the microphone. We'll Claiborne can hear me. I just want to sort of comment and say that some of the usage in particular in this case study is not really coincidental. It happens to be that the library is aligned with what we aim to do, but part of this partnership is that we actually proactively monitor and look at usage following the sale. As part of what Alex's team does in support, where we would contact the library and say, you know, we've noticed that it's a wonderful investment, we're very happy for your business, but we want to help with marketing and outreach and encourage support and see if we can draw your attention to some areas where potentially we can help with some curricular alignment. So the example of the First World War portal, for instance, there's another scholar who happens to look very closely at literature from the time and has a focus in a class on Virginia Woolf and was delighted to use the resource. There's an intercultural communications course at the University of Denver, which major emphasis is gender studies. An important component of this particular First World War collection is the role of women on the home front during wartime. And so we sort of pulled that all together and said, let's figure out how to do this. We came in, we provided a support and a training session, we flagged it, we invited faculty to participate, they came. With very good bagels and fresh fruit, but they did come, and you can see the results, and that really is what we want to highlight, is that we can work together to sort of help make sure that these things are discoverable. So there are a number of ways to get to this content. Let's do it together. That's the story that I'm very grateful that Michael shared with us, and thank you to Alex for walking us through some examples of what that looks like. And we'd be delighted now to field questions and be very specific and let us know about what's happening at your libraries. Please. Yes.
Michael, I've got a lot of questions, but I'll just stick with the best.
Okay.
So, you mentioned early on that you acquired all these collections speculatively.
Right.
Is that unusual for collection development at University of Denver?
It's certainly not unusual for, yes and no, right? So it's not unusual to buy things speculatively. It's what we've always done. We were moving to demand-driven acquisition pretty aggressively for ebooks at the same time, and even for print books. But I think what's unusual is to buy them without any intended usage in mind, right? So our experience earlier on was we would acquire a primary source collection because we knew it would be used, right? So we would have acquired, I don't know what, but we would have acquired this because we know that, or Virginia Woolf material is a perfect example. We would absolutely acquire a collection of digitized Virginia Woolf stuff because we have a faculty member who that's her research area. She's a heavy user of primary sources. It would be almost guaranteed that we use it. So speculatively, in the sense that we don't have a known user is really what I meant. We bought things hoping that we could drive this sort of usage. And I guess the other way to think about it is we buy a monograph. We buy many monographs that are absolutely, it's speculative, right? We buy them on the approval plan, they arrive. We catalog them, we put them on the shelf. Maybe they'll get used, maybe not. But those are usually $50 and $100 decisions. They're not $50,000 decisions. And I guess that's why it is, I think, somewhat unusual for places to buy them without a known use at that sort of price level. Yeah.
Are any of these collections added to over time once they're purchased, or are they more static where they're created and then that content stays exactly the same?
Sure. As we publish them, they are full. So they're full, they are complete as we see them. But we do a lot of work with the academic community when we look at developing certain areas of study. And if we feel like there are certain collections or a certain module that can be added, it's something we will look into. But as they are published, they are complete, yeah.
What discovery system are you using?
It's a really, I think, a really important question, actually, because we're using some and we're about to move to Primo. But I don't think discovery systems work very well for primary source content, and I'm actually not even sure they should. Right? It's a much more specialized thing that you're looking for, and it would be not a good thing if somebody looking through Summon for World War I topics as a first first year student whose expectation is to find secondary literature if all they find is primary source content, or even if the primary source content sort of bubbles to the top and confuses them. At the same time, if you want primary source content, you really want primary source content, and Summon doesn't do that well, and Primo doesn't do that well, and really none of them do it well because there's not a good way to surface this stuff without, I think, confusing people. I did a bunch of analysis a couple years ago of Summon especially, but I also looked through some instances of Primo and EDS to kind of get a sense of where known items that were primary source content from these collections fell in, and it's kind of all over the place, and it's not, they don't do a good job of it. And to the extent that we've been talking in the library about using Blacklight to create our own sort of cross-primary source search tool. We're now at the point where we have so many of these resources that it's hard to keep track of them. It's the same problem that discovery tools sort of were designed to solve with A&I databases in general. So.
Yeah, we're finding the same issue. We were Summon, now we're Primo, which, I mean, might as well be the same thing at
Yep.
this point.
Yep.
But we are also struggling with, if we market our discovery layer as the go-to, Google in the library, hey, students, use
Right.
this, trust that, you're paying for this essentially, and we want you to use this, then it's very difficult to get them to switch gears and also
Yeah.
somehow become power users of these, separate systems.
Right. Yep.
So.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and to the extent that we're successful in driving somebody to Summon, it makes it even harder for them to know about whatever the specialized tool is. So whether it's a specialized tool for primary sources or whether it's a subject-specific tool, they are better off using those in many cases, and it's hard to figure out how to get them there. My dream is that Summon and Primo can become as good as Google, where Google would know you were looking for primary sources, right? How can we get Summon or Primo to do that? Yes?
So data mining as one of the benefits of the ER&L. I've kind of two related questions for you, Michael. How much demand are you seeing from faculty and students for the ability to do data mining? And then how does Adam Matthew handle that when you get those sorts of requests?
So I'll start. We've had a bunch of demand for data mining, although not, as far as I know, from anybody in the humanities. So our data mining has been, we've got a lot of social science people doing data mining in various sources. We've been able to accommodate them, for the most part, by negotiating some separate agreement with somebody. We did something with Redex, and we had Redex needed to do some work on the back. This is what I think what we keep hearing. We didn't design it for that kind of searching or that kind of use. We have to do some work on the back end, and Redex had to do some. I don't even remember what it was, but it was a newspaper database of some sort, and Redex couldn't do it without some back end work that they charged us for. But our data mining requests have been they've been about politics and economics, and for the most part. Although I do think that if we were able to push a set of resources that were where we knew that data mining could just happen, I think that it's another case of where having those resources might drive demand. Yeah.
I guess our policy on it is that we encourage it and we want students to data mine. So the data is there, it's document level, but it's really on request. So if a student requests it, we're more than happy to provide it, regardless of the collection.
So, I'm really impressed that you got such a bump in usage and that you had this really intentional, faculty partnership.
Mm-hmm.
We also have some Adam Matthew collections and we love them, but find it very hard to get people to really see them as a go-to. And I think part of our problem is that we've been casting maybe too wide of a net and assuming that we're going to reach out to all faculty and all users and get everybody really excited about it. So is it fair to say that maybe part of the success is in netting a few faculty champions?
Yep, I think so. Yeah, and we were very deliberate in who we chose. So we both the professor who, right, so we picked people who we knew were sort of people who liked to use the library resources beyond coming in and checking books out. So people who we'd had success in other ways with. And Carol Helstosky is one of those. And actually, Eleanor McNeese, who's the Virginia Woolf Scholar, would be another one of those. But we did two things. We looked through course descriptions and tried to identify courses where we felt like we could really make a difference, and we tried to then identify faculty. So we were approaching a handful of faculty and a handful of courses at a time. And saying, you know, you're teaching this World War I class, look at all the resources we have for World War I, I think is more effective than going to just to the entire history department and saying, we've got a lot of primary sources we can help you with. The other thing that we've done, we have a library, as I think probably everybody does. We have a faculty library advisory board. We meet with them quarterly. Starting 2 or 3 years ago, one of those meetings a year, we bring in people who've used primary sources in some way very successfully, whether it's archives or these digital collections. We don't really care, but we bring them in and they tell their stories, and that seems to have worked really well too. And we do that for other things, not just for primary source content. It's really, we bring in faculty who have had a really positive experience with the library, put them in front of that board. That advisory board then presumably goes out and talks to the faculty in their departments, and I think that helps too. Yeah.
You had mentioned that you had partnered with a lot of library vendors for primary source collections. How to, I know that there's cross-search experiences out there, like Artemis Primary Sources from Gale. How does that impact, how do your students, how do you impart education on how to cross-search a multitude of collections? Because Artemis will cross-search for West Evo and so on and so forth outside collections. So how does that impact the discovery of those resources and those primary source collections, and will you adjust to that?
Yeah, I think we will. We haven't, so I guess there's a way to search across. There's a vendor-specific way to search across in several different cases, and we try to use those when possible. I would say that we have not, we haven't done anything to kind of push those to the forefront, but we've been having conversations about what possible way we can search across. I know we're using them, but I don't know to what extent actually. Anything else?
Thank you, Michael.
All right.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks
Thank you.
all.